Elizabeth I's death was one which was very sad. At the end of her life, the Tudor Queen had given up, as she saw many of her close friends die around her. But following her death, there were a number of wishes that the Tudor monarch gave, but many of these were ignored. One of these was that Elizabeth did not want to be embalmed by the royal doctors, with the thought of her internal organs being removed after death being repulsive to her. She wanted her body to remain intact, and then interred in this way. It was a common practice during the 16th and 17th century for the internal organs of members of the royal family to be removed after death and then be buried away from the body. Jane Seymour, the third wife of Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father, had her heart cut out after death, and this was buried under the altar of Hampton Court Palace's Chapel Royal. But her body was then buried inside of St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. Elizabeth had a strong heart, and she claimed this during a war cry at Tilbury Docks in the face of the Spanish Armada, and she claimed, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." But where is the heart of Elizabeth I today, and where was it left after her burial? The true story is rather horrific and disturbing. Join us today as we look at the heart of Elizabeth I, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. In the last years of Elizabeth I's life, the Tudor Queen became very depressed and down, and she lost the fire in her belly. She was a once determined queen, who claimed she was married to her nation, but a number of her close friends and advisers, whom she had known for decades, passed away over a very short amount of time. She in her last few years even sentenced her former favourite Robert Devereux to death, with the rebel losing his head on Tower Green, but the Queen remained in decent health until 1602. She had throughout her life suffered with smallpox, which could have very easily killed her, and this fight with the disease left her face scarred. But as Elizabeth I was the virgin queen who never married, there was a worry as to who would become king or queen after her. The Scottish king, King James VI, was approached to inherit the throne from Elizabeth, and he accepted, but in winter 1602, Elizabeth caught a chill after she walked in the cold winter London air, and she complained that she had general aches and pains, but also a sore throat, which swelled up. Around this time, she became very obsessed about her demise, and she refused treatment at the hands of doctors, and she spent long periods of time sat in deep thought as she contemplated a number of sins she had committed. One thing that haunted her in particularly was the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, and she was concerned that sanctioning the execution of another anointed queen would prevent her from getting into heaven. But Elizabeth claimed, "I am not well," and she was clearly ready to depart the world and the people that she had ruled over for decades. But as Elizabeth got more sick, the Archbishop Whitgift was fetched to be by her side, and he accompanied her on her deathbed, holding her hand. He said she would get better if she wanted to, and Elizabeth made little response back, and when the Archbishop spoke about the afterlife in heaven, the Queen squeezed his hand, showing she was still there and was listening. It was said of these exchanges between the Queen and Archbishop that he examined her first of faith, and she so punctually answered all of his questions, by lifting up her eyes and by holding up her hand, as it was a comfort to all the beholders. Then the good man told her plainly what she was, and what she was to come to, and though she had long been a queen here upon earth, yet surely she was to yield an account of her stewardship to the King of Kings. After this he began to pray, and all that were by him did answer. After he had continued long in prayer, till the old man's knees were weary, he blessed her, and meant to rise and leave her. The Queen made a sign with her hand. My sister, knowing her meaning, told the bishop the Queen desired he would pray still. He did so for a long half-hour after, and then thought to leave her. The second time she made the sign to have him continue in prayer. He did so for half an hour more, with earnest cries to God for her soul's health, which he uttered, though with the fervency of spirit, as the Queen, to all our sight, much rejoiced thereat, and gave testimony to us, all of her Christian and comfortable ends. By this time it grew late, and everyone departed, all but her women that attended her. Elizabeth I then passed away, and the Queen had for a number of years insisted that following her death she did not want to be embalmed, and that she did not want a post-mortem to be performed upon her. She wanted to be placed inside of a coffin with dignity, and then be buried and to be laid in state beforehand. But the royal doctors decided not to listen to the Queen's wishes. The doctors cut open Elizabeth's body, and they removed her heart and her entrails, and they were removed and were placed inside of a lead casket. The doctors then took out other vital organs, and it was common for this to have occurred at the time, as the organs of royals were taken out and were then placed in separate containers. Mary Queen of Scots had this treatment subjected to her, and her heart was buried nearby to where she was executed inside of Fotheringhay Castle. However, the funeral of Queen Elizabeth I then took place weeks later, and she was buried inside of Westminster Abbey, in a large ceremony complete with much ceremony and pomp. She was, to begin with, buried inside the same tomb and vault as her grandfather Henry VII and grandmother Elizabeth of York, the founders of the Tudor dynasty. It was said that Queen Elizabeth was interred with great pomp in Westminster Abbey. At the time, in the city of Westminster was surcharged with multitudes of all sorts of people, in the streets, houses and windows and gutters, who came to see the obsequy. And when they beheld her statue or effigy lying on the coffin, set forth in royal robes, having a crown upon the head thereof, and a ball and sceptre in each hand, there was such a great sighing, groaning, and weeping, as the like have never been seen or known in memory of man, neither does any history mention any people, time, or state. The same effigy or statue used for Elizabeth I, it's believed, is still inside of Westminster Abbey. Another account of this says, the corpse of the late Queen lay in state at St. James's for more than 3 weeks, while the mourning clothes and funeral arrangements were prepared. On December the 12th, when all was ready, her funeral cortege formed in the courtyard of the palace, but for the solemn procession to Westminster. The procession halted at the great door of Westminster Abbey, and the Queen's coffin was carried inside. 100 poor men in black gowns kept watch over the body that night, holding long torches in their hands, and around them the soldiers of the Royal Guard stood with their staff torches. The next day the Requiem Mass was sung. When the eulogy was over, the coffin was carried to Henry VII's chapel in the Abbey, and placed in a grave on the north side. Her heart, being severally enclosed in a coffin covered with velvet, bound with silver, was separately interred. The household officers broke their staves and threw them into the grave, and as they did the trumpets sounded to signal the beginning of the funeral banquet. The chief mourners went to dinner, leaving the funeral trappings unguarded. In a few minutes the servants and hired mourners and the Londoners who had come to see the Queen laid in her grave had torn down the banners and standards, the arms displayed around the altar, and the hangings fastened to the walls. They scrambled and fought one another for scraps of cloth, until the embroidered cloths were in shreds, and the Queen's effigy pulled into 100 pieces. However, this solves the question as to what happened to the Queen's body, but what happened to the heart of Elizabeth I? This was not buried in the same place as her body, or where she actually died, and was actually allegedly then taken to Westminster Abbey, as one of the accounts states. The heart of Elizabeth was supposedly kept in a lead casket in a box near to the vault where she was buried. This is known as there was a rather gruesome account that emerged in which a young boy came across the box containing not just the heart of Elizabeth I, but also Mary I, Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's half-sister, who she was interred with in the same vault. The boy that discovered this was named William Taswell, and he was later made a priest of the church in Bermondsey, and he stated that when he was a praying boy inside of Westminster Abbey, he came across the depositories, and when he opened the box, he peered in and saw the hearts of the 2 queens, which had been held in this for decades. It was the year 1670, and the royal vault had been opened for the funeral of the Duke of Albemarle. It was said, within niches were the urns, one with the name Queen Mary, the other with that of Queen Elizabeth I. I dipped my hand into each and took out a kind of glutinous red substance, somewhat resembling mortar. Mary's urn contained the least moisture. With this, it's disturbing to consider that the young boy touched the hearts of 2 Tudor queens. But what is bizarre in this story is that the young boy was allowed access to the royal vaults under the floor of Westminster Abbey, and we know that Elizabeth's burial vault was accessed by a small opening underneath the Abbey's floor and from the royal vault. This boy then reached into the box, and he touched the hearts of the queens, and Mary's heart was said to have been placed in a separate vessel, or in the same one, when the body of Elizabeth was moved into the same vault, presumably to save space. The story of the last Tudor Queen's heart is disturbing and shocking, and it may still exist today. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.